You know, I was in there, consent.
That's the way to get everybody's attention, I guess. This is the call to order for the Big C meeting. It is right now about 9 o'clock, and it is the 27th of April, 2022. Please silence your phones and mobile devices so we won't get interrupted. And rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Now, we're going to do the roll call. We start here and go through the whole audience. So to my left over here.
Mary Beth Henderson, Mayor, Reddington Shores.
John Hendricks, Mayor, Madeira Beach.
Dave Gaddis, Mayor of Bel Air Beach.
Indian Shores.
Whole audience, Keith Meyer, Circuit Judge.
Roland LaJoy, guest speaker.
Michael Welch, St. Pete Beach.
Barry Rubin, Treasurer Island, Madeira Beach Chamber.
Zach Westfall, Pinellas County Coastal Management.
John Bishop, Pinellas County Coastal Management.
Sam Digby, the SBC's Institute for Strategic Policy.
Rita Bishop, Executive Assistant to Alex Ray and St. Pete Beach. Megan Powers, Executive Assistant to Robin Bowman, Madeira Beach.
John Wardley, Nelson Coast Fire Rescue.
Chiquita Clark, Duke Energy. Jessica Mara, Tampa Bay Beaches Chamber. Robin Miller, Tampa Bay Beaches Chamber.
Tim Johnson, Waterfront Realty, Board Member of the Chamber.
Good morning, Gina Johnson, Waterfront Realty.
Rich Cariolo, Commissioner, Reddington Beach.
Don Peters, Reddington Beach.
Larry Shear, Commissioner, Pinellas Coast Fire and Rescue District.
Diane Shear, Vice Mayor, Indian Shores.
Cindy Crown, Commissioner, Reddington Shores.
Jeff Schubert, Town Administrator, Reddington Shores.
Bill Queen, Mayor of North Reddington Beach.
David Will, Mayor, Reddington Beach.
Tyler Payne, Mayor of Treasure Island.
Lena Teixeira, City Council Clearwater. Cookie Kennedy, Mayor of the City of Vineyard Orange Beach.
Al Johnson, Mayor St. Pete Beach. And I do want to welcome our new member, Lena Teixeira from Clearwater, now that Hoyt has served us well for a while, and he's, I guess, termed out. So
Yes, he is.
He's no longer on the council. So anyway, they've assigned her to be their representative. Welcome.
Thank you.
Okay, any changes to the agenda or additions, subtractions, and can we get an approval?
Move to approve.
Second.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? It passes. Okay, approval of the minutes of the last meeting. Do I have a
Move to
motion?
approve.
Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. Okay, approval. We don't have any correspondence in our packets.
We got to have the treasurer report.
I don't see we haven't got there yet, have we? Where is it? All right, yes, you're right. Treasurer's report, please.
Good morning.
No, hit that button there.
Okay, it's working. Our treasury report started at $835.84. That was the total receipts. We had one disbursement to Digital Eel, which was $71.08, which brought our total down to $764.76. So with that, I respectfully submit our treasury report.
Okay, could I get a movement?
Move to approve.
Second.
We got a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, thank you. Okay, then correspondence, we didn't have any, so I guess we turn this over to our guest speaker, Dr. LaJoy. Give you a little background. Roland has got a BA and an MA from physics from Boston University, a medical degree from the University of Liège in Belgium, medical internship at Yale, and a fellowship in endocrinology at George Washington University in Washington. 15 years in group practice and 17 in personal practice as an endocrinologist, and is part of the Academy of retired professionals at Eckerd College, which I think brings them here, so.
Yeah, good morning, everybody, and thank you for inviting me. A disclaimer, the information I'm going to give you is not mine. It's been made by people who are much smarter than I am in ecology and environment, and based on basically international type committees like COP26 that just occurred in Glasgow, and the World Economic Forum also has pretty much the same information. A couple of facts before we move on. In the last century, our temperature has risen 1 degree centigrade. That's 1.8 degrees Fahrenheit. Doesn't seem like a lot, does it? Well, let me give you a correlate. Suppose I take someone who has a flu infection and their temperature goes up to 100. What kind of condition are they going to be in? They're going to be pretty sick. Now, if that temperature continues going up, 101, 102, 103, they eventually end up in ICU or die. So biological systems have very narrow zones of equilibrium. And if they're defied, then things break down. Now, so basically, we as human beings have become, if you like, we've become the flu virus to the planet. The almost 8 billion of us are causing so much damage by releasing toxins in the atmosphere, in the oceans, on, that we're disturbing the balance of Earth. So 1.8 degrees Fahrenheit for the planet is enough to disturb reefs, plant growth, change circulation of currents, and cause the trauma that we're seeing now across the planet, and why we're getting all of these climate events that have continued climbing almost every year, and certainly over the last 5 years. Hurricanes, fires, et cetera, from droughts to severe rainfall in other parts of the world. So what's causing this? Well, it's the fact that we as human beings are consuming too much and not preserving anything. And what's happening is we're releasing 4 gases into the atmosphere that are causing the problem. CO2, 420 parts per million. It's never been that high and going up. Never been that high. We have ice cores, and you can't show anything approximating that. Nitrous oxide, laughing gas. No laughing matter in the atmosphere. It's got 300 times the potential heat retention as CO2. Fortunately, it's got a lower concentration in the atmosphere. Obviously, methane. This could become the main problem, especially if ice caps continue melting. Permafrost contains the amount of CO2 40 to 60 times what's already in the atmosphere. So melting of our, if you'd like, ice sheets could become a real problem. And this picture I show you could be reality, not in the next 15, 20, 30, 40 years, but eventually if Greenland and Antarctica land ice melts, we're talking 200 feet of sea elevation, 200 feet. That's where we're heading. And quite frankly, when you look at the meetings at CAP 26, we're not meeting the objectives of the Paris Accords, the Kyoto Accords, et cetera, et cetera. The 26 means the international committees for climate change have been meeting 26 years. Have we done anything of impact? No. CO2 levels continue to rise. We're not practicing any of the recommendations made by the scientists. And a lot of that is due to financial and political issues. And so I'm going to show you a couple of slides to emphasize what I've just brought up. This was a little video in Miami that I'm going to skip. Now, you probably know that Miami is having their own problems with flooding. They're having sunny day flooding, heavy rains. Their streets are flooding, Miami Beach. So what are they doing? Well, they spent, and are spending over $1 billion to raise the highway there by 2 or 3 feet. I hate to tell them, but they're going to be underwater by 2050, no question about it. Our levels, the way we're currently going, are going up another 2 or 3 feet by 2050 on the target we now are at. So unless we make some big changes, some of the roads here will be underwater too. Now, so they're also putting in expensive large pumps to pump the water out and basically into the bay and polluting the bay in the process. And so is that a solution? Well, it's a temporary solution. At the end of that particular film, one of the scientists comments, well, enjoy it while you can, because basically this is going to be in Atlantis in the next 50 to 100 years. So enjoy it what you can, but get ready to move. And this is a problem not just in Miami. This is a problem all along the eastern seacoast. If you take a look at what's happening to the barrier islands of North Carolina and Virginia, they're having the same problem we're having here in Florida. It's just that our landmass, our coastline, as you can see, has got billions and billions of dollars of real estate built on it. And so there could be huge losses financially. But at the same time, if you take a look, by 2050 to 2100, the coastline will regress and the areas in the red will no longer be livable. Not my projections, but that's the trend we're on. And the models have been right on when I say that. They've actually underestimated the speed at which things are deteriorating. And that's because of amplifiers. What do I mean by amplifiers? Well, let's take a look at what happens when the heat goes up a couple of degrees. You get more water vapor, evaporation. You also get slightly sea level rise because of heat, which expands water. So what happens is water vapor in the atmosphere works like a blanket. So the heat retained by CO2, nitrous oxide, methane, no longer can dissipate into the upper atmosphere. It's kept it's basically kept within the very narrow layer of the atmosphere. And so the heat keeps going up. So basically this becomes a circular type phenomenon where more heat, more water vapor, more heat retention. Plus if we keep putting what I call heat retention molecules, like I just mentioned, you accelerate the problem. The other problem is when you melt sea ice, basically snow and ice reflect heat back up in the atmosphere. When you shrink that, you have basically darker soil, your heat is retained, you melt more ice, your sea levels rise even more. So this becomes very circular. Now these temperatures that I'm talking about don't go up uniformly. They can be quite varied, country to country or even inside a country, depending on currents. I'll give you an example, and I'm just going to move ahead a little bit. But basically, what happens is there is something in the Arctic called the polar vortex. What is that? The polar vortex is a circular air current that is created by a change of temperature between the ground and the upper atmosphere. And it's a high pressure zone that basically keeps warm weather from going up into the higher latitudes. What's happened as the ice melts, that current, because of heat differentials, has not been quite the same and has weakened. And what happens, it's being weaker in the central part of Canada and Antarctica and more intense on the east coast. So what's happened is the temperature in central Canada, northern Canada, the Yukon Territory, et cetera, has been up 5 to 7 degrees versus 1 degree or 1.5 degrees in the lower states. Kind of interesting. So what's the problem there? Again, a magnifier of the problem, because as that heat gets up into the higher latitudes, you get even more melting. And if you melt the permafrost up in the Arctic and Greenland, for instance, what do you release? Methane. Methane is 83 times more heat retentive than CO2. The good thing, it's got a shorter half-life. Carbon dioxide lives in the atmosphere, or stays in the atmosphere for more than a century. Nitric oxide, about 90 years. Methane, 12 years. It's broken down into, guess what? CO2 and water. So the problem is, all that methane is going to accelerate the problem. And so the process I'm talking to you about is only going to speed up. So the predictions now on the trend we're on is that we're going up another couple of feet by 2050. We're not even coming close to meeting the standards of the Kyoto, Paris, or Glasgow protocols, because they want to have us cut CO2 levels to 40% what they were in 2005. Not only are we not there, we're going up, because basically 3 or 4 years ago, our CO2 levels were about 420 or 415. They're now over that. They're 425. We're going up. So we're not meeting even the basic standards of any of these protocols. So our temperature is expected to get up over 1.5 centigrade, 2.7 Fahrenheit by 2050. Now, that doesn't seem like a lot, but keep in mind, those fine-tuning I'm talking to you about, we're already seeing reefs, the whitening of reefs. I was a scuba diver, so I've seen it. The reefs are looking pretty sick. So again, what happens there is your fisheries are going to suffer, because they're basically the nursery of a lot of fish life. So if we lose our reefs, we lose not only barrier protection, but we lose sea life, protein, and food. And those temperatures also decrease crop growth, and droughts become more common. So this becomes a vicious cycle. Now, basically, the reason greenhouse gases are a problem is basically the sun's energy waves can penetrate the atmosphere, but those particles then absorb the ultraviolet light that's reflected from the earth. So that heat and energy can't get out. So they heat trappers. Basically, water vapor doesn't create the heat, it just keeps it in. It's sort of like having a parka on when you go skiing. Your body generates the heat, but what keeps it in is that layer, that blanket, or that material that covers it. And basically, water vapor is your enemy here. Not only that, but it causes a huge increase in rains. And that's why you hear when you can get these unique heavy storms now, where you get 3, 4, 5 inches and more of rain dropping anywhere along the planet. We just had South Africa having severe floods. There were huge floods in Europe that were unprecedented. Storms of the century are now storms of the year. That's no accident. That's due to weather change. So let's move through this. And that's what I was saying. See, basically, CH4, over a century, that's methane, because it's got a short half-life, is about 25 times heat retentive compared to CO2. However, in the short term, let's just say a decade, it's about 83 times. So are we going to wait a century to find out what this does? Especially if methane is going to skyrocket, we won't have the chance. Nitrous oxide, 300 times. Now, the thing is 420 parts per million for CO2. It's 1.4 parts per million for methane, and only 0.4 for nitrous oxide. So CO2 is still the enemy because of its high concentration. 60% or so of heating of the atmosphere is CO2. Okay, so that's still our enemy number one, only because of such high concentrations. If methane and nitrous oxide skyrocketed, we'd really be in quick trouble. And that could happen, again, with the melting ice caps, besides the water rise. Okay, so we'll move on. So basically, if you doubt CO2 and temperature are correlated, it's basically a linear map, curvilinear map that matches almost identically. And again, for those people who doubt this, because I hear comments, well, we've always had weather cycles in the past. It's true, the weather cycles have occurred. We've had melting ice ages, hotter periods of time, but they don't occur in a period of 30 or 40 years. We've seen the skyrocketing area. Take a look at the slope of this peak since 1960. We're talking 30, 40, 50 years. Historical cycles have taken millennia, centuries and centuries, to get those peaks and valleys you see. They don't occur in 30 years naturally. Doesn't happen. Hasn't happened. So this is the real thing, and we're creating it. We're the virus that's causing the temperature of Earth to go up. And basically, you can see events. There are at least 20 or so billion-dollar storms of one sort or another, whether they were fires, floods, hurricanes, etc. These episodes are increasing along with the temperature. The correlation is just too high to neglect. You can put your head in the sand, literally, if you want here, but it's not going to help. Wishful thinking is not the key. And then let me just, and we talked about this, so take a look at this. Basically Greenland and Antarctica. We have 5,500,000 square miles with basically 6,400,000 cubic miles of ice. You could fit the US and most of Canada on this island. Now that ice can be 300 feet thick in a lot of places. That's a lot of fresh water. You say, well, why isn't it happening? Well, the problem is right now, it's the water ice that's cracking off. So that's not going to raise water levels. It's the land ice that's the problem. Now, what is the problem with that? Well, keep in mind that that sea ice is a buttress for those 3-mile thick sheet of land ice. So if you take away that barrier, that ice will now be able to push into the ocean and eventually melt. And it's going to be a gradual process. And it's melting now from the top down. You can see that in Greenland if you look at films of what's happening in Greenland ice. Now, Greenland is a much smaller island, but these represent basically about 99% of all land ice on the planet, these two areas. And again, the elevation you're going to get if you melt this is literally over 200 feet. So we're talking here 1 or 2 feet. That picture I showed you of New York is a reality if this occurs. And we're heading that way. And again, this is going to speed up as time goes on. So this is the polar vortex I was talking about, where the Gulf Stream goes up in the middle of the country, up into the Canadian area in the Arctic, and causes a problem of weather. You tend to have, again, warmer weather in that area and cooler weather in the Northeast, and bad winters in the Northeast with record snow, while you have droughts in the West. And our supercomputers are now, with the models we have, right on. They're getting better and better, like they are in hurricane prediction. And so if you take a supercomputer and you have 40,000 sites across the planet that you're plugging in, and you have good computer programs, algorithms, you're going to get pretty precise data. And they've predicted for a decade or more the droughts we have in the West and the high rain and wet areas and snow areas we have in the Northeast. And those models are staying there. They're not budging. They're probably going to get worse. We already have early forest fires now in the southwest. They've never occurred this early. So, and if you take a look at droughts in North Africa, worsening and worsening and worsening. These are the models that came out of basically the Glasgow meetings, COP6, or 26 rather. Basically, if you see in that orange area, I don't think I have a lake, it won't show up on the screen. That red line right in the middle of the orange, that's the path we're now on. So what are we going to get? Well, basically, we're going to get 2 to 3 more feet, and basically at least a half a degree more by 2050. That's right around the corner. Now, if you project that out to 2100, we're talking temperatures up 5 to 9 degrees, depending on which line you're on, and a good maybe 3 or 4 more feet, 5 feet of water. So that's the trend we're on. We are not budging this line. It's continuing to increase. So these are different models. And even if we do nothing, let's just say we had 0 CO2 emissions, not likely to occur, especially now that we're actually going to go back to coal with this war in the Ukraine. This is only going to get worse. And China has now got 60% of its energy coming from coal. They're now the worst polluter on the planet, but not per capita. We are. The U.S. continues to hold the record. China is now about 9th per capita because they have basically 1.5 billion people. We have 330 million. So do the math. So we're the worst offender on the planet. But anyway, if you don't take away, or if you took away all CO2, your temperature still would go up a little bit because of the stuff that's already in the atmosphere that lasts for a century or more. So we're not only not lowering the CO2, we're adding to it. But even if you didn't add any more, you would probably still have a little bit of increase in your temperature by 2100 anyway. We're just going to accelerate it and be a source of our own demise over time, it looks like. Governmental action. I've given up on governmental act. We're 26 years into this. The governments make all these promises, but the politicians nix them. Biden plan for climate change, guess what? Hasn't passed. Why? One guy who's in the coal industry. I won't tell you who it is, but he actually owns a coal trading company that he makes 70% of his salary on. One guy blocked that. Conflict of interest, but that's the nature of the game in politics. These countries say they're going to give money. They say they're going to do this. They say they're going to report what they're doing. None of them do it. They lie, or they back off because of other economic problems, or divert the money to more, what they think are more crucial things. Some graft in there as well. So take a look at this NASA scientist who's part of this he's part of the group that basically drives the International Committee for Climate Change. And he's very frustrated. This Peter Kalmus is his name, and he's been dealing with basically these ecological problems since its very beginning, since the first meeting. We've been trying to warn you guys for decades. The scientists of the world have been ignored. It's got to stop, or we're going to lose everything. I couldn't put it any more succinctly than that, and it is everything. Nothing's going to survive on the planet under 200 feet of water, maybe some fish. That's about it. Yeah, Ron? Yeah.
Dr. LaJoy, that's how you say it. There are a lot of people that'll say, I'm not going to be here for 50 years, in 50 years. And they probably wouldn't say, I don't care, but they would say that I'm not going to be here in 50 years when things change. There are people who, and maybe in this room, who don't believe any of what you just said is true, okay? So my question to you is, I would like to believe that my brothers and sisters who are on this board with me do believe there is something. And so in saying that, how do we, regardless of party, open a conversation? It's kind of like, we were in a meeting yesterday about home rule. And I know that doesn't sound like it has anything to do with that. But the legislators totally believe, when we were told that yesterday, that home rule is a partisan issue, okay? And some of the people that I work with here that are mayors said, how could that possibly be? And so when I listen to what you're saying, and I do live in a city that I would like to believe that some of our problems with beach renourishment could have a possibility that it's affected why with the hurricanes and everything that we lose sand. How do we, as an elected official, regardless of political issues, what are the things that we can do at our level?
That's a really tough problem. Number one, basically, if we can't do it at a national, international level, we're not going to make the impacts that are needed. We can make small impacts person to person, I agree. But this is a grand scale problem and is going to require international cooperation and huge investments. And unless we elect politicians that are receptive to this issue, we're just going to be tiptoeing through the tulips in a way, because we're not going to be able to solve the problem by small communities. We can do our part, I agree, and I think that needs to be done, if for no other reason than by setting example. I also think it's time to forget about the politics of this, in the sense that I'm not trying to be politically correct. I've got data. I've been a scientist. I want to continue being a scientist. And if I believe and I have the facts, I need to adapt to those facts as they change. But at the same time, I'm going to push those facts, whether people like it or not. I am not going to be politically correct. I'm going to be as objective as I can. But the political correctness is gone from our system. All you have to do is take a look at Washington. Do they care about political correctness? No. I also think we need to make this a moral and ethical imperative. This self-centered greed that drives our culture is why this is happening and why we're destroying the planet. We need to make this a moral imperative that we're protecting not only our own quality of life, but the lives of the generations after us and the other species on this planet that have a right not to be killed by our ineptitudes.
Thank you.
I have a question, Doctor. You've given us a great presentation here, and to your point, some of us believe it, some of us don't. Assuming that you are correct and the scientists are all correct, it doesn't look like China, India, and the rest of the world, no matter what they do at Glasgow or whatever, are on board. So if that's the case, and your predictions and these predictions are true, is there a technological solution? You haven't touched on that, carbon recapture, that kind of stuff.
Well, I do have some of that. Some of the, what I call less dramatic issues. Yeah. These are some of the less dramatic issues, building efficiencies, et cetera, et cetera. Basically, carbon capture is an issue I'm going to come up with in a second. But obviously, efficient electrical power plants. There are a lot of these kind of things we can do. Certainly, nuclear energy, this is the big issue right here. The planet is just not going to tolerate 9 or 10 billion people with the way we live now. And obviously, any family planning plans from at least our particular political aspect in the U.S. is not being supported for reasons that you well know. And so that's part of it. Now, the more issues, carbon capture. The problem with it, yeah, can it be done? Yes, but we don't have the real infrastructure. Now, the U.S. is 50% of the carbon capture of the planet. So what are we doing? We're removing a small amount. I'm not sure why that came up. Basically, we're taking out 1.2 gigatons of carbon, okay? What are we putting into the atmosphere? Basically 130, we're putting about 34.8 gigatons of carbon into the atmosphere. So with the current level of carbon capture going on in the planet, we're not going to be able to increase the infrastructure of carbon capture fast enough to make the inroads we need by 2050. Not only that, but China is not invested in this at all currently. And so they're twice the CO2 producers we are. And so, yes, there are ways, and there are 10 different models of how to capture carbon by these techniques. Basically, one of the easy ways is, the flaming that occurs when you drill a well. That's an easy place to carbon capture. We're not doing that. If you go, for instance, you do an aerial flight over Russia or Saudi Arabia, you see all that natural gas being burnt off. They don't want to deal with it. It's too much of a hassle. They don't have the financial incentives. Quote unquote, financial incentives drive the show on this, or its personal ideals. But anyway, so carbon capture is an issue. My, I think, best suggestion would be small nuclear, what we call small nuclear reactors, SMRs. These are reactors that basically are self-contained, can be transported on basically semi-trucks in a box and set up very easily in small communities, and basically can go 20, 25 years before being recharged. Big nuclear plants aren't going to work. They take too long. Their rods have to be changed every couple of years, which is a big hassle. They cost billions of dollars to build. The regulations take 10 years to resolve. So if we're going to do anything with energy short term that takes us out, for instance, what's the issue? We're doing this on nuclear submarines. They're safe. Have you heard anything damaging about nuclear submarine reactors? No. These self-contained small reactors really work. Why they haven't taken off? Unclear. Now, nuclear produces about 20% of the energy, electricity in America today. But we're taking one at a time off, like Germany did. Germany is depending on the Gazprom pipeline as they're shutting down their nuclear reactors. Does that make any sense? Not to me. But anyway, this is kind of the folly. People are just not thinking about logical ways for the long term to solve this. But for me, that probably is the best short-term solution I can think of to ramp up energy that is not basically producing abnormal heat retention molecules. If we don't do anything, this is happening now. We're cutting down trees. We need to be planting trees. We're losing forests. There are CO2 sink. Ecosystems collapsing, happening all over the world. Low-lying cities flooded. Well, I don't have to tell you about that. Wildfires. Don't have to tell you about that. Prolonged droughts. More destructive storms. Glaciers shrinking. Rivers drying up. Colorado River, good example. Take a look at that. This Colorado River and several other rivers in the country in trouble. Extinction of up to half the world's species. That's happening now. We're losing species every day. Spread of tropical infectious diseases. Mosquitoes and other insects love heat. So millions of climate refugees. Now, if you think we've got a problem now with people coming up from South America and Central America, or the refugees in the Ukraine, think about the millions of people in Southeast Asia that are going to be flooded, that have to come out somewhere. Do you think you're going to be able to keep the gates up? No way. They're going to find a way in. this is going to be a real problem. And we're already seeing economic distress. Take a look at Sri Lanka, Peru. They're having riots in the street because they can't get adequate fuel and food. The world, basically the World Bank just promised them a loan for millions and millions of dollars to be able to keep afloat. And then increased heat-related deaths. There are more deaths from heat than there are from the actual storms we're getting, especially the elderly and the poor who can't afford air conditioners, et cetera, who live in areas where there's no such thing. So this is just the beginning. There's a longer list than this, actually, of things that can happen. But these are happening now. This is not science fiction. This is not something I'm making up. This is happening now. If you have any doubts and you have the ability to open your eyes and see what's happening, you can't deny that something bad is occurring. And unless you can come up with alternate reasons why all of this is occurring all of a sudden, give them to me. But otherwise, climate change is going to be the thing that is causing this to occur. Thank you.
Thank you, Roland. Before you leave, first of all, it was enlightening, but I think we knew that. I just had no idea how bad it was. On a local level, I know all of us are doing similar things to do our share. I know our city is transitioning all its vehicles to electric vehicles, things like that. But mitigation is probably the first thing on our minds, is because we know we really can't individually have a huge effect on the conditions that you describe. But the results of those conditions on a local basis, we have to deal with. We're doing an analysis, a water threats analysis, seeing as how we're such a low-lying area that takes us out to 2050. I don't recall that it was a 2-foot sea level rise that was based on. I think it was more like a foot. But, those are huge numbers for us. I mean, we're small governments. And even, when somebody says, okay, yeah, raise your tax rate. Well, you could triple your tax rate and you wouldn't be able to pay for it in 30 years. It's that bad. I don't know what, you get any suggestions as what we should be doing to help minimize the effect of this on our cities?
Well, basically, there's not a whole lot you can do except beach renourishment, of course. You can put up attempt seawalls of some sort, mangroves, of course. Putting more mangroves, they're a great barrier, soil retainers as well. Seawalls on a beach is, to me, a little difficult because of how fluid sand is. And you're going to tend to, as we talked about, undermine your seawalls. Unless there's some way to prevent that, I think it's going to be very difficult with the wave action that occurs on an open beach. And outside of that, basically, there's not a whole lot. As one of the scientists from Miami said, do the best you can to mitigate with what you have available, but at the same time, get ready to move when things become untenable. And that's going to happen the way things are going sooner or later. But it's not going to happen in the next decade or two. But certainly by 2100, I think a lot of the coastline is going to have to be abandoned. And I don't see a solution to that. I just don't. If someone has an idea, I'd like to hear it. But as much as I've looked at this, I don't see it, which is why I sold my condo in Anna Maria.
Really?
Yeah. And why I have a 4,000-foot house, a house at 4,000 feet in North Carolina. When I saw, after the hurricanes we've had, one or the other, and the close calls we've had, and the sunny day flooding that would occur down there, and a heavy rain or even a high tide, I said, I'm not having two properties in the water because I live on Tampa Bay, so one liability is enough.
I see that. But I just want to get a raise of hands. How many of you have sunny day flooding in your cities?
Based on what?
Sunny day, if you've got a non-rain event, that a high tide, do you get water in your streets?
Of course, of course.
All of us.
We've had that before.
Yeah, I know, but it's getting a lot worse. That's the problem.
Let me ask you a question. How much do you think our increase of our tides has been sea level rise over the last 20 years in Pinellas County?
It's been a lot more than it has in the previous 20.
John Bishop, do you know the answer to that one?
Not off the top of my head.
I think I got the information from you once before. It's been an inch.
Well, I tell you what, it's, there's a lot of people that can argue about that have data. And one of the things that, you know, this reminds me of a monologue that now deceased George Carlin did about people caring about the environment. He says, you know, what's the difference? He says, you know, the Earth was here for billions of years before we were, and it will be here billions of years afterwards. I guess what he missed the point was that it was here before we were here, but it'll be here after we're gone.
Maybe. I'll give you an example. Take a look at Venus. It's called a twin of Earth. It's about the same size. They had an atmosphere. Where are they now? 95% O2 levels, CO2 levels. Basically, atmospheric pressure 90 times what it is on Earth. Temperatures of near 900 degrees Fahrenheit. Okay. And a lot of CO2 in the atmosphere. So what happened to them? So basically it fried the planet. And so that could happen to us. That was one of the models. We're either going to become Mars or we're going to become Venus if this continues unbridled.
I guess that brings up the question whether Venus was like Earth way, way, way back when.
That's correct. We don't know. But it just shows the possibility of having a dense CO2 atmosphere with levels that basically they have 90 times the CO2 concentration that we do in our atmosphere at Venus.
Wow.
And that's the kind of planet you create. So yeah, Earth could be here, but is it going to be totally barren or is it going to be a fireball? We don't know. But that's a concern, is because people say it's going to be here after us. If we're here after us with other species on it, I'd be a lot more comfortable with that. But to ruin a $5 billion year process by human insanity, it doesn't give me a lot of comfort.
Okay. Any
So-
other questions, comments?
Yeah, I was just, and you touched on it a little bit. And when I was a kid, US was 120 million. Now we're 340 million. And basically, I see the problem as overpopulation. That's what's generating everything.
What got me on it, I was reading Population Bomb by Paul Ehrlich back in the 70s, which got me part of what got me involved in this kind of stuff. And Rachel Carson's Silent Spring was another book I read. So we've been warned about this for 50, 60 years. This is not a new topic, but it hasn't moved us. And that's the sad part about human nature. It hasn't moved us, despite the information that we've been told about forever, at least most of our lifetimes. And again, are we going to be complacent about what happens to future generations? It sounds like we are. All I know, if I were 20 years old now, and I looked at what we have done as our generation, I would be pretty pissed. What are you leaving us? $30 trillion bill? And bad ecology? What's our future? So that's the moral imperative I'm talking about, is are we going to save anything for people after us, kids after us?
Well, every person that's added is adding to the CO2, is adding to everything else.
Correct?
Okay. Anything else?
Consumption might have something to do with things.
Might have.
Well, you know, you add a human, you're adding consumption. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah.
Well, the people at the World Economic Forum, which are big hitters, came in their private jets, probably on limos, et cetera. So it's fine for them to preach, but they're the polluters. The 1% is doing a lot of damage. out of proportion.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Doctor. Okay, thank you. Okay, let's, food for thought, I guess. We don't have anything in old business discussion items. Do you have anybody that has something burning on their minds that wants the group to hear? No? All right, do we have any representatives from our legislative groups? I don't see anybody from any of the legislators' offices in here, so I assume that that's not going to be a legislative update. I do want to know, since I couldn't attend yesterday, you had a meeting with, I think it was Senator Brandis, DeSigley, and Cheney, correct? DeSigley and Cheney. Oh, just DeSigley and Cheney? What was the result of that? For those of us who got, I mean, did everybody else go but me? Yeah. What?
Well, like I said to Dr. LaJoy, I was the most surprised at Dave, actually, when Dave said, and you can elaborate, Dave, because you had a lot of comments on the whole conversation we had, that, basically somehow this has all become a partisan issue. And I was even shocked, okay? And Dave said, how could you say that? That short-term rentals are a partisan issue. And I do think, in listening to you and listening to that conversation, is I think that if you're against an issue, that's an easy answer to say that on any side, on either side, that's a partisan issue. And I think that, and you could shake your head, but I'm very involved with short-term rentals, so I know what I'm talking about. And, in our cities, we're very concerned about the short-term rentals and how they're affecting our community. Dave, they did a referendum, and 86.5%?
86%, yes, do not support short-term rentals in our town. So that's what is not being looked at here, is that our residents' voices are not being heard whatsoever. They mentioned that, they've heard us, the mayors and commissions, complain about the removing home rule, and they're tired of hearing that. But it's our residents here are speaking to us, and we are relaying that information to them.
And I think Mayor Queen said it really eloquently when he mentioned, he said, we're looking for a representative that is going to be with us and go with where we're at. And even if it causes them issues with other legislators, you represent us. And that we do that here. We're with our residents. And, it remains to be said, we only have what's happened in the past to judge, the actions of the legislators, even in our own county, as far as.
Cookie,
issues.
the two main points that I got from that meeting with them was, number one, property rights are of the utmost importance to them.
Absolutely.
And number two, they do not want to go against the Speaker of the House or the Speaker of the Senate. They don't want to go against anybody. They're going to go with whatever the ruling party says. They don't want to get on the outside of them. So they're going to do whatever they want, which means that they're not going to represent everybody out here. They're going to represent whoever's in power there. That's a problem. And that's what you're saying.
Right.
They're not representing us anymore. So when we go out and vote, we need to vote for people that are going to represent us. Period. And that's how we're going to send a message to them. That's the only way we're going to send a message to them.
Believe that.
They want us to put together little pieces of, in this case, the subject of short-term rentals, and one of the thoughts that we had, which I thought was a great thought, was, let us have the ability to do duration. If you give us duration as far as short-term rentals,
Location and frequency as well. Give us those three things.
well,
They don't want to give you any.
they don't want to give us anything,
Well,
okay?
yeah, well, you talk.
So if they would give us duration, a time limit that we can deal with, then that would be a huge piece for the communities.
That's a start, anyway. One of the things, I guess the argument on the, property rights thing is, what about the property rights of the people who live on either side of that house?
We said it.
Well,
We
correct,
said it
right,
to them.
that's,
And
was made
the
clear.
answer was.
They don't
that
care.
does not resonate with the legislators, that you could live each side of somebody who has a short-term rental and been there for 30 years. And that concept that, what about their property rights, does not resonate. It doesn't matter. And
Because it's all about money. That's what it boils down
Right,
to.
it boils down to money. You drill down far enough, pretty much everything
That's
boils down to money.
But that is at least good feedback that they're saying it doesn't resonate. So if it's something that doesn't resonate, if we keep beating that drum, it's not helping anything because they're telling us that doesn't resonate. So let's find a different message to beat the drum to that might resonate.
Let's find a different
I know it
representative.
resonates.
Yeah.
but, well, yeah.
That's, because, you need to, if it doesn't resonate, but you want to get a certain result.
Right.
And they don't want to hear home rule. That, many
Even
brought
though-
up the home rule, so I said, well, we're not talking about, let's just talk about this issue, short-term rentals, that's what we're talking about.
Yeah.
And they look at home rule as a block of the economy. That's their whole point, is to keep growing the economy. It's not about homeowners or property rights. It's to make the machine continue growing, and that's the economy. I've seen it, everyone I've spoken with, that's all they care about, is getting more money into this state.
They don't want you to control your local zoning. They want to control the zoning.
Well, and as we
And,
talked about
they
at that
talked, you know-
meeting, when they take over zoning, then you're talking about property rights. That's where they're taking away our citizens' property rights to participate in those discussions through planning boards, workshops, things like that, on how we want to handle our zoning.
How
They
many?
talked about fees, too. That was the other thing,
Okay.
that the fees and also enforcement. And I believe Dave or Mayor Queen brought up that when you have a small city, you have a certain amount of funding that you can spend in a community, and there isn't enough funding there to be able to police these kinds of things. And, he brought up, Clearwater, and I said Clearwater 2 or 3 years ago had 11 code enforcement officers for short-term rentals. They may even have more now, because it was a while ago that I actually talked to some of their 2 head code enforcers. And of course, they have a huge city. But my point is that that's a huge amount of money. We have 2 in our community, and they're full-time. So, and then the other thing was the fees. You usually put a system in place of, how, if somebody is out of line and the police are called or whatever, and there's steps that are taken, and one of the answers was the fees need to be raised. Well, in the documents that are the laws that have been put with the legislators, we cannot, as a city, have fees that are outlandish. It has to be reasonable, is the wording, it's reasonable. So,
The other point was that get away from the fees, but if you've got 3 egregious violations over a period of time, there is a thing called the death penalty where they lose their ability to do
Correct.
short-term rentals. They didn't really want to hear that.
No.
But there should be a mechanism, if you've got a consistent problem, that you can stop that short-term rental, but they don't have that.
How many of us have grandfathered ordinances that limit short-term rentals? We still have one. I believe you lost yours,
we
correct?
lost ours. Dave?
Dave is going to be
Yes,
contending
we do,
his.
but it is constantly being attacked. Yes, so that is in court as usual, but we are going to defend that,
Well, as far as the fees are concerned, my city managers wife was the assistant city manager of Miami Beach. And they actually got sued by the state, I believe, because they jacked up the penalties for short-term rentals to something like, I think it was $10,000 or $12,000.
$15,000.
A day, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The fees are capped by state statute at $500. So it's not enough of a deterrent.
Well,
Right.
you know what we did? Our ordinance says that you don't have to rent it to be in violation. You have to advertise it. So we got one guy that lives like 100 yards from my house that was renting his place, and even when he had it advertised on Airbnb and didn't have a minimum on it. And our special magistrate dinged him for $500 a day for like 9 months, something like that. So he's got over $60,000 in fines sitting in his lap right now.
But if he's making $10,000 a day, what does he care?
And that's exactly why Miami did what they
Right.
did. Yeah. So, anyway. We gotta see, I think you're right. Let's get different elected officials. Yeah. Okay, anything else in anybody's mind? We do have a spot on the agenda here for public comment, if anybody has something they'd like to say. Uh-oh, here comes the judge.
Uh-oh, Judge.
I have the unenviable position of not being able to comment on anything that just was said. But I'm Keith Meyer. I'm one of your circuit judges. I'm up for reelection this term. And I'm a local guy, worked down at Johns Pass, and actually worked for Hoyt Hamilton at Palm Pavilion. So I'm very familiar with our community. And if anyone has any questions for me, please reach out, give me a call. VoteKeithMeyer.com has all of our contact information. And I got to get back to court. But
Okay.
it was very interesting. Thank you all for
Nice
having
to
me
meet
today.
you.
Thanks, Judge.
Bye now. Okay, anyone else?
I would say
Is
one
it-
word, if I might.
The microphone's right here.
Pardon? Here?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm Michael Welch. I live in St. Pete Beach, and I'm on the Beach Steward Committee. I marched in the first Earth Day Parade in New York City 50 years ago. I've been involved in beach retention, keeping beaches instead of concrete practically my whole life. Roland's presentation should frighten people to death, but it doesn't seem to. If the cities would put more trees and less concrete, it would be a big start in the right direction. Concrete is a major cause of the problems that we have. The more concrete we pour in seawalls and the fewer mangroves we put up, the worse we're making things. Don't buy big trucks for the city, buy electric vehicles. You all, I've listened to you twice now, you're all on the right page with this thing, but there are things we can do in our own lives. Don't eat McDonald's. That would be a very good start for your health and for the planet. Thank you all for what you're doing.
Thank you, Michael. Yes, sir. Yeah, why don't you turn your microphone on so everybody can hear you like that?
If Dr. Bishop has any information on,
Now, I believe you
I was
guys
just
are,
commenting on McDonald's.
you're coming next month, I assume. Is-
I think the sea turtle presentation was going to be next month.
Okay. Oh, yeah. I knew something.
I don't have too many comments, but I did double check the numbers, and it's like 2 to 3 inches.
In 20 years?
Yeah. It depends which gauge you look at, but just roughly, quickly on my cell phone, grabbing the St. Pete gauge and the Clearwater one, it's about
Okay,
2 to 3 inches, but that's
okay.
the only thing I have.
Yeah. Great, thank you, Jim.
Yep. Oh, and the beach nourishment project is probably going to be pushed back slightly. It's probably going to be late summer, maybe early fall
That's
of '23,
Yeah, okay.
which
next
might
year.
actually be better for the tourist season. I know we always get a lot of complaints when they're
Oh, yeah.
there on 4th of July, and so.
John, are those programs, can you piggyback and have a renourishment done? But if you do a one down at Treasure Island or St. Pete Beach, can you piggyback and do a small portion somewhere else along with that?
The Army Corps doesn't have any funds allocated for any of the other beaches. So right now, they treat Sand Key as one large project. And so
we're hoping, that they'll make some accommodations and that we'll come to some kind of a agreement, but, we're still waiting on a response. Their headquarters is reviewing everything. So we're hoping that we'll be able to find a solution where we can try to get the project going again, but, as of now, it's still 100% easements before we can construct. And since they look at the cost benefit of the entire project length, they don't really, at least at this phase, they don't want to split it up, or they won't split it up.
So even
Because the
though-
same cost benefit isn't there.
So even though North Reddington Beach has all their easements,
They see it as one project.
yeah, and there's
That's
not
why
a-
I'm asking about piggybacking. If we
Yeah.
could piggyback off of somebody else.
They,
maybe we could
they,
get
they
it.
see it as one project. It'd be like trying to convince someone to build like one of the walls of a house without building the rest of it. They look at it as the structural stability of the entire project. So,
Okay.
maybe that'll change. The Army Corps does sometimes change their opinions on things, but they've been pretty hold fast on this one. And so the funds would just be for Treasure Island and Long Key.
Robin Miller's still here, and Robin has been working on some beach, I don't want to call it renourishment, but sand delivery.
Yeah, that's why I halted back there before I did it. Yeah, so I came up with an idea that what I'm trying to term as interim sand movement and mitigation. So because we have sand shifting due to various circumstances, a storm or whatever, and instead of waiting for the full nourishment project, there might be an ability to do interim fixes or interim projects for your communities to keep the beach accessible and, looking good and all of that. So then by the time nourishment comes, you're not having these big ledges. It does not, the plan that we're developing does not include the word dredging. So it would not be full nourishment.
And it's funded by the county.
So I have initiated conversations, and I am advocating strongly for some county funding for that. And I've spoken to leadership already, and so they have just asked that we put a solid package together. So I have emailed each of you with a deadline of, I think I said May 6th, to give me either pictures and where I know Mayor Payne has sent his, and I think Mayor
gonna
Hendricks
get
has
more.
something. Yeah, so we can put that together. It's a substantial case. And then we can figure out, where we can go at that. But I have, I'm working through the Tourist Development Council and Charlie Justice as the chairman.
Thank you. All right, you,
This is the first I've heard of any of this, so if anyone has
Let's
at the
just-
county,
we just started that
I'll
conversation.
review it then when I see it. But,
yeah, Clay,
I will say, though, that without having any Army Corps permits or state permits, it would be a long process.
yeah.
We
When
just
I
started
hear-
that conversation last week at a meeting we had with the chamber, so that's fresh.
When I hear that
We're not
dredging
trying to
is,
do something behind y'all, behind your back.
Okay, thank you, John.
I want to clarify, that's why you get those emails from me this week. And I want to say, we have successfully accomplished sand movement in St. Pete Beach with a state DEP permit. And we were able to get the DEP out there this past week so that those properties that have that sand behind, we're able to shift that sand legally with the DEP permit. So we're not looking at big giant projects, and I respect, I would never want to be in his position with his knowledge he has. We're trying to say, let's get some small amount of funding from the tourist development and see if we can't help the communities shift sand when it needs to be, when it's moved over.
how about shifting some of that sand that's in John's path?
Yes, I know.
I know.
When I heard that dredging is not on the table, that did not make me a happy camper.
All right, let's go on to city events. Let's start down there. Mayor Pat, you got something for us?
No, we will be announcing shortly that our monument project,
I can't hear you.
Turn your mic on.
There we go.
usually don't need a mic, but June 16th, we're scheduling to unveil our monument project. It's very special and very dear to myself and our council and our residents, and invitations will be going out shortly. So mark the date, and it's something that's been in the process for about 12 years, and it's finally coming to a wonderful conclusion. Thank you.
All right, April 30th in Bel Air Beach, we are having the Fly Me to the Moon music and food event at Bayside Park. It's where we do anything, so please come by and check it out.
Thank you. John?
Madeira Beach, of course, this is our 75th anniversary. Coming up this weekend is the Kingfish Tournament, starting Thursday night. Will be the captain's meeting, bands all weekend. The weigh-in will be Saturday. May 7th is the Grouper Gala. So we'll be having a big fish dinner out there, a band all evening. It'll be a lot of fun, so y'all come out.
Okay.
The only event that we have coming up is a meet and greet for our new town administrator on May 2nd from 6 to 7. We're going to have light refreshments, so if you can't say hi to him today, come to the meet and greet on the 2nd.
Okay, thank you. Bill?
All quiet.
David?
On May 16th, Monday night, we are going to have for our residents a sea turtle presentation out on the beach about an hour before sunset.
Thank you. Tyler?
This Saturday, April 30th, from 9 to 2, we have the Tampa Bay Corporate Sports Fest happening behind the Bilmar Hotel. We stole it from St. Pete Beach, sorry. They decided to move it over behind the Bilmar.
We stole it from Clearwater. So
Okay. So that's really exciting. There'll be thousands of people out on the beach competing in relay-style events and then being around to patronize our businesses afterwards, hopefully. So come check that out. There's all kinds of water events, volleyball, and spectators are welcome. And I think that's it.
Lena?
Well, our Sugar Sand Festival was absolutely spectacular, but I do want to focus on our downtown revitalization efforts. As some of you may be aware, we did close down the streets post-COVID, and we have continued to make it a permanent closure. It turned it into quite a wonderful thing. And so I encourage everyone to go to downtown, especially on the weekends, where each block has live music every single weekend. And you actually kind of feel like you're in Europe, like a little piazza. So come and support our revitalization efforts of downtown.
Thank you. Cookie?
It sounds like April 30th is a big day for everybody. We have the biggest beach fest, and it starts at 11 a.m. It goes till 9:30, several different bands. May 21st, and I will reach out to all of you. We will have Hands Across the Sand. I don't know of any other city that is doing that this year, and so I would like for all of you to come and be with us at it. It'll be, I believe it starts at 11:30. It's the 21st of May, and hopefully we can all be together at that.
Okay. St. Pete Beach is fairly quiet right now. We have the usual weekend art mart down in Paso Grill on Saturdays, and the Corey Avenue market is, the Sunday market is continuing through the summer. We tried it last year and it worked out okay, so we're going to continue that. And I think, other than that, we're pretty much done. So listen, I want to thank everybody for their attention, and we'll adjourn. Thank you.
Thank you.